Have you ever wondered, what if the very moment you call death is not an end, but a startling awakening? Imagine that your last breath here might actually be your first breath somewhere else. The thought unsettles us because it contradicts nearly everything we are taught about life's final chapter. Yet, what if death is just another kind of birth? A door opening instead of closing, a new dream beginning instead of all dreams ending. Oh, now, as we step into this exploration together, let me ask you something important. If you discovered that death is nothing more than waking up in another reality, would that comfort you, or disturb everything you've believed until now? Share that thought in the comments while you drift deeper into this mystery. It may reveal more about your mind than you expect. For centuries, cultures around the world have painted death not as a finish line but as a passage. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the bardo, a transition state between lives, where consciousness wanders in a dreamlike field before choosing its next form. Ancient Egyptians imagined the weighing of the heart, where your soul was measured against the feather of truth, not to end your story, but to redirect it. Even the ancient Greeks spoke of the river Lethe, where souls would drink to forget their past lives before stepping into new ones. These echoes across civilizations suggest that humans have always suspected something profound, that the end is never really the end. Modern science, too, has begun touching the edges of this riddle. Dr. Sam Parnia from New York University conducted extensive studies on patients who experienced cardiac arrest. His research, published in Resuscitation in 2014, revealed that some people retained awareness for several minutes after their hearts had stopped. They described floating above their bodies, hearing doctors' voices, or traveling through tunnels of light. These accounts challenge our conventional definitions of consciousness. If the mind can survive clinical death, even for a few minutes, what does that imply about the moments beyond? You can imagine lying there, your eyes closed for the last time. The hospital monitor flatlines. Your loved ones whisper their goodbyes. Yet instead of vanishing, you suddenly find yourself standing in a corridor, or maybe floating in an expanse of stars, feeling oddly awake. That scenario feels impossible, and yet thousands of near-death survivors have painted pictures not too far from this. They speak of overwhelming peace, of conversations with beings of light, of seeing their lives replay as if on a cosmic screen. Consider Pam Reynolds, a famous case documented in the early 1990s at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Arizona. During a rare brain surgery, her body was cooled, her blood drained, her brain waves flatlined. Clinically, she was dead, yet when revived, she described floating outside her body, witnessing details of the surgical tools and conversations that she could not have perceived physically. Researchers have debated her account for decades, but whether explained by brain chemistry or something beyond, her story continues to disturb and inspire. And here's the haunting thought: if death is waking up elsewhere, then everything you do here might just be a rehearsal for that awakening. Every kindness, every cruelty, every moment of awareness, what if they are not erased, but carried like luggage into the next dream? Imagine drifting from this life straight into another, without pause, without gap, as if one long dream flows into the next. So, as you listen, allow yourself to soften into this paradox. Death could be an ending or a doorway. It could be silence or music in another key. Perhaps the question is not whether death is final, but whether anything ever truly ends at all. And with that thought, we move into the echoes of ancient civilizations, who left us clues that death is not disappearance, but transformation. What if the civilizations we call ancient were not primitive at all, but were guardians of truths about death and consciousness that we have only just begun to rediscover? Imagine for a moment that the pyramids, the temples, the sacred texts were not just cultural artifacts, but coded instructions for understanding what happens when the body dies. Could it be that their symbols were never meant to preserve history, but to guide souls through eternity? When you think of the Egyptians, it's easy to imagine grand tombs and golden sarcophagi. But behind the treasures was a philosophy, the belief that death was a continuation, not a termination. The pyramid texts, dating back over 4,000 years, describe the soul's journey through the afterlife. The pharaoh's spirit was believed to pass through trials, merge with stars, and eventually become one with the gods. Archaeologists once assumed these were just myths. Yet some modern scholars, like Dr. Jeremy Nadler from Oxford, suggest these texts may encode altered states of consciousness, states not unlike near-death experiences reported today. The Tibetans, centuries later, echoed similar ideas. The Bardo Thodol, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, was written in the 8th century and still read to the dying today. It describes visions of light, peaceful deities, and terrifying illusions that a soul encounters after death. But the book emphasizes something radical, that these visions are projections of one's own mind. In other words, what you experience after death might not be imposed from outside, but shaped by your own consciousness. You felt it in dreams before, haven't you? When you realize dream that the world around you bends and twists with your thoughts. Imagine that power magnified, stretched into eternity. The Greeks also whispered similar truths. Plato wrote of the myth of air, in which a soldier dies in battle, only to awaken on a cosmic plane where souls choose their next lives before returning to Earth. What's striking is how similar this is to modern reports of life reviews. During near-death experiences, people describe watching their lives unfold like a movie, but with one twist they feel every emotion they caused in others, as if empathy itself becomes the judge. The Greeks, it seems, understood that death was not escape, but reckoning. And then there are the Mayans. Their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, describes a descent into Xibalba, the underworld, not as eternal punishment, but as a place of trials and transformation. Souls face challenges, illusions, and confrontations with their own fears. Doesn't that sound eerily like the psychological landscapes people describe when their hearts stop? Hallucination, or hidden knowledge resurfacing. Picture yourself lying under the night sky thousands of years ago, firelight flickering, elders telling you that the stars are ancestors. That death is not exile, but homecoming. That you are not lost when you leave, but folded back into a larger dream. These weren't bedtime stories. They were survival guides for the spirit. Modern science often dismisses this as superstition. But pause and consider, how could civilizations separated by oceans, Egyptians, Greeks, Mayans, Tibetans, arrive at almost identical models of consciousness surviving death? Is it coincidence or convergence on a truth too strange to ignore? Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in the 1970s, pointed out these parallels. He argued that the ancients may have drawn from the same universal experiences that people still report today in hospitals and hospice wards. And here's the paradox that lingers. The ancients lived without our machines, yet they may have understood the machinery of consciousness better than we do. Their myths, when stripped of metaphor, sound almost like travelogues of other dimensions. Allow yourself to wonder, if death is waking into another dream, then perhaps these ancient civilizations left us roadmaps for that awakening. Not warnings of doom, but maps of continuity etched in stone and scripture. And maybe, just maybe, the question is not whether their stories are true, but whether we will recognize the echoes when we hear them again in our own journeys. As we move forward, we will look not only at civilizations, but also at the teachers and texts that carried these mysteries across time, whispering truths that still resonate with seekers today. What if every teacher who walked this earth, the sages, the prophets, the mystics, were all trying to tell us the same hidden truth? That death is not an end, but a doorway. Imagine for a moment that all the sacred texts, no matter their culture or language, were fragments of a single story, a story written not in ink, but in consciousness itself. Wouldn't that change the way you read them? The Indian sage Patanjali, writing over 2,000 years ago, described consciousness as a field that continues beyond the body. His Yoga Sutras speak of states of awareness where the boundaries of self dissolve, where time and space no longer apply. Doesn't that sound remarkably close to what people report in near-death experiences? The sense of timelessness, the expansion into something infinite. In the Gospel of Thomas, a text once hidden from the world, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death." Scholars like Dr. Elaine Pagels at Princeton have suggested that these words hint at a mystical view of life and death, one in which realizing the divine within ourselves transforms the meaning of mortality. Could it be that his message was less about salvation after death and more about recognizing that life and death are threads in the same eternal fabric? Then we have the Sufi mystics. Rumi, in the 13th century, wrote poetry that still stirs the soul today. "Don't grieve," he said. "Anything you lose comes round in another form." His verses suggest that death is not annihilation, but metamorphosis, like water turning to vapor, a change of form without loss of essence. Imagine hearing those words not on a page, but whispered into your ear as you drift towards sleep. Wouldn't they feel like a key sliding into a lock you've always carried? The Buddhists, too, through the teachings of the Buddha himself, spoke of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Yet liberation, nirvana, was not escaping death, but transcending the illusion that life and death are separate at all. Dr. Robert Thurman of Columbia University often explains that in Buddhist thought, death is not a final chapter, but simply a page turn in an infinite book. Think about your own life for a moment. The countless selves you've already been. The child you once were is gone, but not destroyed. They live as memory, as influence, as part of who you are right now. In this way, haven't you already experienced many deaths and rebirths? And then, in the deserts of the Middle East, the Hermetic texts emerged, writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. These works declared, "As above, so below, as within, so without." This principle suggests that the journey of the soul after death mirrors the journey within life. Modern researchers like Dr. Brian Weiss, who studied past life regression, have pointed out that these Hermetic ideas align curiously with accounts people give when they recall vivid experiences between lives. Coincidence or the survival of ancient knowledge? Let's step into a moment. Picture yourself opening a sacred text, maybe the Bible, the Quran, the Upanishads. As you read, notice how the words shift depending on your state of mind. In grief, they comfort. In fear, they warn. In peace, they illuminate. Could it be that these texts are mirrors, reflecting the consciousness of the reader back to themselves? If so, then perhaps what they really describe is not an external heaven or hell, but the inner landscapes we will all face when the body releases us. This is the thread uniting the mystics, and texts across the world agree that the mind, your mind, is not confined to your brain. It is part of something vaster, something continuous. And if consciousness extends beyond death, then all of these teachings might be less about preparing for an ending and more about recognizing that we have always been infinite. Pause here for a moment, let those words sink in. Death as awakening. Death as continuation, death as reflection. You don't need to decide whether it's true or false right now. Just notice how the possibility feels in your body. Does it scare you? Or does it feel strangely familiar, like a memory you can't quite place? And so, as we leave the teachers and their timeless texts, we carry forward a question. If mystics across cultures all pointed to life after life, why does modern science so often resist it? To explore that, we must step into the laboratories and revolutions of scientific thought itself. What if the very foundations of modern science, the discipline we trust to explain our reality, were built not to explore consciousness, but to avoid it? Imagine for a moment that in seeking to measure the stars and the atoms, scientists quietly decided that the mind, the soul, and the afterlife were unmeasurable, and therefore unworthy of study. Doesn't that seem like an odd place to draw the line? Especially when consciousness is the very thing allowing us to ask the questions at all. The scientific revolution of the 17th century gave us giants like Isaac Newton. In 1687, Newton's Principia Mathematica established the laws of motion and gravity, creating a clockwork vision of the universe. Everything was predictable, calculable, mechanical. But in this worldview, where was the place for consciousness? Newton himself was deeply religious, writing more about theology than physics. But his equations stripped the universe of mystery. The afterlife was left outside the equations, as though reality could be reduced to falling apples and orbiting planets. Then came René Descartes, the philosopher, mathematician who famously declared, "I think, therefore I am." In 1641, Descartes argued for a separation of mind and body, a dualism. The body was a machine, the mind was immaterial. While this opened the door to considering the soul, it also created a split. Science would take the body, religion would take the soul, and consciousness, the bridge between them, fell into a no man's land. Even now, researchers call it the hard problem of consciousness. Fast forward to the 19th century. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 shook the foundations of human identity. Evolution explained life through natural selection, adaptation, survival. Suddenly, the story of creation wasn't about divine intention, but random mutation. Many concluded that if life itself was a product of chance, then death was simply oblivion. Yet Darwin himself never claimed to solve the riddle of consciousness. Evolution explained the machinery of bodies, but not the spark that looks out through your eyes. Isn't it strange that we took an explanation for biology and assumed it was also an explanation for the soul? As psychology emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, figures like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung began to explore the inner life. Freud in Vienna spoke of unconscious drives, repression, dreams as wish fulfillment. Jung in Zurich saw dreams as gateways to archetypes, a collective unconscious shared by humanity. Their work suggested that death might not erase the psyche, but return it to some deeper pool. Jung himself wrote in his memoirs of near-death visions he experienced in 1944, describing floating above the earth, seeing it from space, and feeling reluctant to return. If one of the fathers of psychology glimpsed something beyond, should we dismiss it so easily? Meanwhile, physics was marching forward. James Clerk Maxwell's equations in the 1860s described invisible electromagnetic fields, unseen forces that govern light and energy. Suddenly, the universe was not just particles, but waves, vibrations. Doesn't that echo ancient traditions that spoke of the soul as vibration, frequency, resonance? Could Maxwell have unknowingly provided the bridge between the material and the immaterial? And yet, despite all of this, the dominant narrative in science became materialism. The belief that only matter is real, and everything, even consciousness, emerges from matter. This idea was solidified by figures like Thomas Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog. Huxley compared consciousness to a steam whistle on a train, a byproduct of the engine, making noise but doing nothing. According to this view, your awareness is just the side effect of neurons firing. But if that were true, why would the experience of being you feel so central, so undeniable? Consider this thought experiment. Imagine holding a brain in your hand, every neuron intact. You could map every electrical impulse, measure every chemical release. But would that tell you what it feels like to love, to dream, to face death? No equation explains the qualia, the raw experience of being. Science could dissect the brain forever and still not capture the mystery of consciousness. Picture yourself as one of those early scientists. You are staring through a telescope, discovering moons around Jupiter. You are peering into a microscope, watching tiny cells divide. You feel the thrill of understanding, and yet, when you close your eyes, you are confronted by the greatest mystery of all. Who is the I that sees? That question has haunted every researcher, every philosopher, every mystic. Perhaps it is the thread connecting science and spirituality, a thread we lost when we built the walls too high between them. The foundations of modern science gave us incredible tools, but they also gave us blind spots. By excluding consciousness, by labeling death as an end, they simplified reality into mechanics. And yet, cracks in the materialist worldview were already forming. Strange reports, anomalous experiences, visions that refused to fit the model kept surfacing. Science tried to sweep them aside, but reality, it seems, has a way of returning. As you drift deeper into this journey, consider this: if the very foundations of science were built without accounting for the soul, then maybe the next revolution is not about splitting atoms or decoding DNA, but about reuniting consciousness with the cosmos. And to see how that revolution began, we must turn to the bold thinkers who shattered the old models and opened the door to something far stranger. What happens when the very framework of knowledge we rely upon suddenly breaks? Imagine believing for centuries that the universe is a perfect, predictable machine, only to discover cracks in the gears. Cracks that suggest the machine might be alive, unpredictable, even conscious. Revolutions in scientific thought have always shaken not just laboratories, but entire civilizations. They force us to rethink who we are and what might happen when we die. The early 20th century delivered the first great shock, Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. In 1905, his special relativity revealed that time and space are not fixed backdrops but interwoven fabric. A decade later, general relativity showed that gravity is not a force pulling at objects but the bending of space-time itself. Suddenly, time was no longer absolute. It could stretch, slow, bend. If time is elastic, what does that mean for death? Perhaps the end of life in one timeline is simply the continuation in another curve of space-time. Einstein himself once consoled the widow of a close friend, writing in 1955 that for physicists the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. But relativity was just the beginning. In the strange laboratories of quantum physics, another revolution was stirring. In the 1920s, Niels Bohr in Copenhagen and Werner Heisenberg in Germany revealed that at the smallest scales, particles do not behave like solid marbles. They are waves of probability, existing in many possible states until observed. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, proposed in 1927, shattered the idea of exact predictability. The observer seemed to matter. Could it be that consciousness itself collapses possibility into reality? Erwin Schrödinger's famous thought experiment in 1935, the cat both alive and dead until observed, illustrated this paradox. But Schrödinger himself, deeply influenced by Vedantic philosophy, believed consciousness was fundamental, not an accident of matter. He once wrote, "In truth, there is only one mind. If the pioneers of quantum theory themselves were questioning the line between matter and mind, should we be so quick to dismiss the link between physics and the afterlife? Another seismic shift came with the rise of chaos theory in the 1960s. Edward Lorenz, a meteorologist at MIT, discovered that small differences in initial conditions could lead to vastly different outcomes. The famous butterfly effect. Suddenly, the universe was not the neat clockwork of Newton, but a sensitive, unpredictable web. Life and death, then, might not be endpoints in a straight line, but branches in an infinite fractal of possibilities. Could consciousness itself ride those branching patterns into new realities after physical death? Meanwhile, neuroscience was undergoing its own revolutions. In the 1940s, Canadian neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield electrically stimulated patients' brains during surgery. To his astonishment, they reported vivid memories, hearing voices, or even feeling detached from their bodies. These were not random firings. They were structured experiences, often with emotional depth. Penfield concluded that memory and consciousness might not be confined to the physical brain alone. If true, what awakens after death might be the continuation of a mind that was never purely material. As revolutions stacked upon one another, old certainties collapsed. In biology, the discovery of DNA in 1953 by Watson and Crick reshaped our understanding of life. The genetic code revealed how traits were passed on, but it also raised new mysteries. What animates the code itself? A string of molecules is not alive without the breath of consciousness interpreting it. Some biologists, like Rupert Sheldrake decades later, proposed morphic fields, guiding not just genes but habits of nature, suggesting that memory and pattern might exist beyond material structures. And psychology, too, had its revolutions. In the mid-20th century, Abraham Maslow and the humanistic psychologists broke from the reductionism of behaviorism. They spoke of peak experiences, self-actualization, transcendence. Maslow described moments where individuals felt connected to something timeless and infinite, glimpses that could point to consciousness beyond the body. Around the same time, near-death research began emerging, with doctors like Raymond Moody documenting patients who clinically died and returned describing tunnels of light, overwhelming peace, and encounters with deceased relatives. Could these consistent reports be dismissed as hallucinations, or do they signal another scientific revolution still waiting to be recognized? Now pause for a moment and imagine yourself living in each of these scientific eras. You believe the universe is a clock until relativity tells you time bends. You think matter is solid until quantum mechanics says it's waves of possibility. You trust cause and effect until chaos theory whispers of infinite outcomes. Each time, the rug is pulled out from under your understanding. Isn't it possible that death itself is another such revolution, one we are only beginning to glimpse? The story of science is not the story of certainty, but of overturning certainty. Each revolution brings us closer not to final answers, but to deeper mysteries. And as we stand at the edge of today's knowledge, we may be in the midst of another great shift, one where consciousness is no longer dismissed as a byproduct, but recognized as the foundation. As you continue listening, drifting deeper into this exploration, ask yourself if every scientific revolution has expanded our picture of reality. Why should we assume death is the final wall? Perhaps it is simply the next doorway, waiting to be opened. What if the stories we dismiss as myths are actually glimpses of a hidden continuity between life and death? Across centuries, strange accounts appear in dusty chronicles and whispered traditions, reports of souls wandering, of voices from beyond, of death not as an end but as a doorway. History is not only battles and kings, it is also the fragile record of human encounters with the unknown. These encounters disturb, inspire, and challenge the very boundaries of existence. In 415 BCE, during the Peloponnesian War, Greek historian Herodotus described tales of soldiers who collapsed in battle, seemingly lifeless, only to awaken days later with vivid accounts of other realms. One such man, Aristeas of Proconnesus, was said to have left his body, traveled vast distances in spirit, and returned to recount his visions. Were these hallucinations or early reports of near-death experiences? In 81 CE, Roman naturalist Pliny the Younger documented spectral appearances in haunted houses. But among his letters is a quieter mystery. He wrote of his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who perished during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Witnesses claimed that in his final moments, Pliny the Elder calmly spoke of being guided by voices, urging him not to fear. Was this merely courage, or did he sense a passage into something beyond? Medieval Europe carried its own troves of strangeness. In the 12th century, Benedictine monk Orderic Vitalis recorded the story of a knight who fell unconscious and awoke, describing vast landscapes of light and shadow, where souls awaited judgment. Though framed in Christian imagery, the structure of his journey, tunnels, guides, revelations, echoes modern near-death experiences. It is as though across centuries, across religions, the pattern repeats. People return from the edge with visions of continuity. In the East, Tibetan chronicles speak of delogs, individuals who die for days, traverse other realms, and return with guidance for the living. In the 17th century, a Tibetan woman named Dawa Drolma was said to have spent 5 days in the Bardo, the intermediate state described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Upon awakening, she dictated intricate visions of realms, deities, and karmic balances, much of which aligned with canonical texts she had never studied. How do we explain such consistency between lived experience and sacred description? Even in more recent centuries, strangeness lingers. In 1742, Swedish scientist and mystic Emanuel Swedenborg suffered a near-fatal illness. During his recovery, he reported journeys into spiritual worlds, encounters with angels, and visions of those recently deceased. Swedenborg went on to document these realms in meticulous detail, insisting that consciousness persisted after death. Though ridiculed by many contemporaries, his writings influenced philosophers like Kant and later spiritual movements across Europe. Fast forward to 19th century America. During the Civil War, newspapers carried testimonies of soldiers revived from the brink of death. Some spoke of radiant lights, others of seeing fallen comrades beckoning them onward. These stories spread quietly in camps, offering solace to men facing mortality each day. Were these just the brain's final flickers under duress, or fragments of something larger, refracted through human courage and fear? Imagine yourself for a moment in one of those tents, the air thick with smoke, hearing a fellow soldier whisper that he saw a light calling him back. Would you dismiss him? Or would you wonder whether the line between this world and the next is thinner than you thought? Not all accounts are tied to trauma. In Victorian England, the Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, began systematically cataloging deathbed visions. One report, published in 1894, described a woman who saw her recently deceased brother standing at her bedside, reassuring her as she slipped away. Multiple witnesses confirmed her calm demeanor and final smile. For the researchers, such cases were not proof, but patterns, and patterns have power. Anthropologists, too, have found recurring motifs. In Native American traditions, stories often speak of the soul traveling westward after death, toward the setting sun, where ancestors await. In Polynesian cultures, the spirit is believed to climb a cosmic tree or mountain, bridging this world and the next. Though details differ, the underlying message is the same: death is transition, not termination. Could it be that history's strangest accounts are not anomalies, but fragments of a larger tapestry we've only begun to recognize. When we place them side by side, from ancient Greece to Tibetan dialogues, from Swedenborg's visions to Civil War testimonies, a curious resonance emerges. The imagery may shift, but the themes endure: continuity, guidance, light, reunion. Now, as you listen in the quiet of your own room, allow yourself to imagine these stories not as distant myths, but as echoes of a possibility that touches you directly. What if the boundary between life and death is porous, and these accounts are footprints across the threshold? Drifting deeper into this thought, consider how history may not just record wars and inventions, but also humanity's earliest dialogues with eternity. Perhaps our ancestors were not mistaken dreamers, but early explorers of the same mystery we face today. And perhaps, when your time comes, you too will become part of that unbroken story. A story where death is not the end, but the beginning of another chapter. What if the strangest stories are not locked in dusty libraries or ancient scrolls, but unfolding right now, in our own time? We often imagine the modern age as rational, scientific, immune to myth. And yet the unexplained still breaks through the cracks. Strange phenomena occur in hospitals, in airplanes, in ordinary living rooms. They resist explanation, as if reality itself is reminding us that mystery is never far away. In 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody published Life After Life, compiling more than 150 cases of people revived after clinical death. His patients described tunnels lights, life reviews, and overwhelming feelings of peace. Moody coined the term near-death experience, or NDE, and what had once been whispered in secret suddenly became part of cultural conversation. Could millions of people really be imagining the same pattern? Or was something deeper happening beneath the surface? Hospitals have since become unexpected laboratories for these mysteries. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist in the Netherlands, published a study in The Lancet in 2001 documenting 62 patients who experienced NDEs after cardiac arrest. Some described floating above their bodies, accurately recalling conversations and procedures that occurred while they were unconscious. In several cases, their descriptions matched verifiable events. How do we explain awareness when the brain is clinically inactive? And then there are the children. Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia spent decades investigating cases of children who claimed to remember past lives. He documented over 500 cases across cultures, many involving detailed knowledge of people or places the child had no ordinary way of knowing. In one striking case from India, a child accurately described the home, family, and even the manner of death of a man from another village. Skeptics called it coincidence or cultural conditioning. But Stevenson insisted that the sheer weight of consistent detail could not be dismissed so easily. Imagine hearing a child, perhaps your own, describe in calm detail the life of someone long gone. Would you brush it aside? Or would you feel a chill, a hint that consciousness may travel further than we dare believe? Unexplained phenomena are not limited to life after death accounts. In 1983, a man named George Ritchie described an experience during which he left his body in an army hospital, encountered beings of light, and was told to return. His story inspired Dr. Moody's research and later fueled entire waves of study into spiritual dimensions of consciousness. Each testimony feeds into the next, as though individuals are pointing to a vast landscape beyond our normal map of reality. Even military archives contain anomalies. The CIA's declassified Stargate project, running from the 1970s through the 1990s, investigated remote viewing, the alleged ability to perceive distant locations without physical presence. While the program's results remain controversial, documents reveal that some remote viewers produced information accurate enough to assist intelligence operations. If consciousness can reach across space, why not across life and death? Technology has also created new arenas for the mysterious. In 2014, researchers at Southampton University studied over 2,000 cardiac arrest survivors. Nearly 40% reported a sense of awareness during unconsciousness. One man recalled watching his resuscitation for several minutes. A memory later confirmed by staff. If consciousness continues when measurable brain activity does not, then perhaps death itself is not an end, but a threshold. Consider how unsettling this is. You've been taught that life is anchored in neurons and synapses. Yet modern accounts, from hospitals to military programs, hint at something far stranger. Awareness that survives, travels, persists. Could it be that our understanding of reality is as outdated as believing the Earth is flat? Ordinary people, too, bring forward reports that resist easy dismissal. In 2008, a nurse named Penny Sartori published her observations from years working in intensive care. Patients often described meeting deceased relatives or being gently told it wasn't their time. These reports were consistent across backgrounds, beliefs, and ages. Sartori concluded that such experiences could not be brushed aside as mere hallucination. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine yourself lying in a hospital bed, drifting at the edge. Machines hum, doctors work, but your awareness slips free. You find yourself watching from above, calm, detached, even curious. Then, light, a presence. A question: do you want to stay? Do you want to return? When you awaken, everything is different. You've glimpsed something no one can quite explain. How would you live after that? The deeper implication of all these modern accounts is that consciousness might be far more resilient than material science has assumed. It might not be produced by the brain at all, but instead filtered through it, the way light shines through a prism. If so, then death is less a collapse than a release, like stepping out of a narrow room into a wide, open landscape. And here's the paradox: the modern world, with all its technology, is both the most skeptical and the most fertile ground for these mysteries. The more we measure, the more anomalies appear. The more we try to confine consciousness, the more it slips beyond boundaries. As you drift with these thoughts, consider the possibility that the strange accounts of today are preparing us for a new understanding of existence. They suggest that death is not annihilation but migration, not silence but transformation. And as we move forward, science and spirituality may converge in ways we can scarcely imagine. The question lingers: when your time comes, what will you see? And will it be stranger than anything we've ever recorded? What if the rules you've trusted all your life, cause and effect, time marching forward, objects staying in place, are illusions? Physics, at its deepest level, suggests reality is stranger than any dream. Quantum mechanics, the science of the very small, has been baffling scientists for more than a century, and its paradoxes may hold clues about consciousness, death, and what lies beyond. Take the famous double-slit experiment. In the early 1800s, Thomas Young showed that light behaved like a wave. Later, with more advanced equipment, scientists discovered that when particles like electrons are fired at two slits, they create an interference pattern, as if they are waves passing through both slits at once. But here's the catch: the moment an observer measures which slit the particle goes through, the wave collapses into a particle, and the interference disappears. Observation itself seems to shape reality. Dr. John Wheeler of Princeton University called this the participatory universe. He suggested that reality does not exist in a definite state until it is observed. Imagine that. The cosmos waiting for consciousness to give it form. If observation is central to existence, what happens when the observer dies? Does reality itself shift? And then there's quantum entanglement. In 1935, Einstein-Podolsky and Rosen described what they thought was a flaw in quantum theory: that two particles could become mysteriously linked, no matter how far apart they were. Change the state of one, and the other responds instantly, even across galaxies. Einstein dismissed it as spooky action at a distance. Yet decades later, experiments by Elaine Aspect in the 1980s proved entanglement is real. If particles can stay connected beyond space and time, might human consciousness also be entangled with something greater, something eternal? Consider Schrodinger's cat, the thought experiment in which a cat in a box is both alive and dead until observed. It's absurd, unsettling, yet it forces us to confront the possibility that multiple realities exist simultaneously, waiting for awareness to select one. Could death be another version of this paradox, a transition into the path not taken in this life? Quantum paradoxes aren't confined to laboratories. In 2019, researchers in Vienna and Brisbane tested the concept of observer-dependent reality. Their findings suggested that two observers can experience conflicting realities, both valid in their own frame of reference. In other words, reality is not absolute. It depends on perspective. If life itself is observer-dependent, then death may simply shift us into another vantage point, another valid version of reality. Imagine for a moment that your life is a movie, projected frame by frame. But consciousness is not the screen, it's the light of the projector. When one reel ends, does the light go out? Or does it simply illuminate another story, another dream? Quantum mechanics whispers that the light continues, even when the film changes. Some physicists have gone further. Dr. Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation, proposed in 1957, suggests that every quantum possibility actually happens, each in its own branching universe. You choose one path, but countless other versions of you continue along others. If that's true, then perhaps death is less an end than a shift into another branch, another unfolding possibility. Picture yourself standing at a crossroads. In one direction lies the life you know, your routines, your memories, your story. In the other, countless invisible paths stretch into infinity. You take one step, and your awareness flows into a new reality. That step might be what we call death. Not annihilation, but transition. Not an end, but an expansion. Quantum mechanics also challenges our understanding of time. Experiments in delayed choice, inspired by Wheeler, suggest that actions in the present can influence events in the past. Imagine dropping a stone into a pond and watching the ripples flow backward as well as forward. If time is not linear, then perhaps death is not the future we fear, but a doorway that connects all moments at once. Even respected figures like Nobel laureate Niels Bohr reminded us, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. And shock it does. It challenges the assumption that we are passive spectators in a mechanical universe. Instead, it hints that we are active participants, co-creators, entangled with every particle, every possibility. Let this sink in as you drift deeper. If your thoughts can collapse a wave into a particle, if your awareness can connect across space like entangled twins, if multiple versions of you exist right now, then what is death? Perhaps only the loosening of one perspective, the shifting of the observer, the continuation of light into another frame. Close your eyes. Feel the paradox. You are here, and yet you are more than here. You are bound, and yet you are infinite. You are alive, and perhaps already alive in countless other realities. Quantum physics suggests that nothing is as final as it seems. And so, as you drift further into this exploration, allow yourself to imagine that death itself may be just another quantum leap, a step into a superposition of possibilities where consciousness never truly ends. What if reality itself is not fixed, but a shifting landscape of probabilities? Imagine rolling a dice, 6 outcomes are possible, but only one appears when it lands. Quantum theory suggests that life operates in a similar way. The universe is not made of certainties, but of likelihoods, patterns of possibility waiting for an observer to give them form. This idea traces back to the early 20th century, when physicists like Werner Heisenberg introduced the uncertainty principle. Heisenberg showed that you cannot know both the position and momentum of a particle with perfect accuracy. The more you know about one, the less you know about the other. It wasn't just a limitation of measurement, it was woven into reality itself. At the smallest scales, certainty is replaced by probability. In 1926, Max Born proposed that the mathematics of quantum mechanics should be read as probability waves. A particle doesn't exist in one definite place until measured. It exists as a cloud of potential outcomes. When observation occurs, one outcome becomes real, and the rest fade away. But where do those other possibilities go? Do they vanish, or do they continue in unseen dimensions? Imagine your life as a series of dice rolls. Each choice you make, each turn of events exists as probability until the moment it unfolds. You choose one path, but countless other versions of you might unfold elsewhere. Marrying another partner, taking another job, living in another city. Could death be the point at which probabilities no longer collapse into one reality, but expand into many? Dr. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, once described quantum mechanics as nature exploring every possible path before deciding which one to display. In his path integral formulation, a particle doesn't just take one route, it explores all possible routes simultaneously, with each contributing to the final outcome. Think about what that implies for consciousness. If every path exists at once, then perhaps every version of your life and every version of your death is real somewhere. Let's bring this closer. Imagine you're standing at a doorway. Behind it are infinite possible rooms. Some are bright, others dark, some familiar, others utterly strange. Probability is the architecture of those rooms. Your awareness, your act of walking through the door, determines which room you step into. But what if death is simply walking through without limitation, entering a place where all rooms become accessible at once? Even in neuroscience, probability plays a role. The brain itself doesn't operate as a strict machine, but as a probabilistic system. Dr. Carl Friston, a neuroscientist at University College London, developed the free energy principle, suggesting that the brain constantly predicts probabilities about the world and updates itself when surprised. Your experience of reality is not raw data, but a dance of probabilities filtered through expectation. If the mind already works this way, then perhaps consciousness after death continues in a probabilistic form, weaving new realities from infinite options. History gives us stories that echo this. Ancient Buddhist teachings spoke of the bardo, a transitional space after death where countless possibilities arise before rebirth. In Tibetan texts, it is described as a realm shaped by probability, where thoughts themselves determine the next reality you enter. Thousands of years ago, without quantum physics, they imagined something remarkably similar, that existence is a flow of probabilities, not certainties. And there are personal stories too. People who have had near-death experiences often describe a sensation of multiple choices, as though they could stay in another world or return to this one. One woman described standing in a field of light, feeling she could step forward into another life or turn back to this one. Her account echoes the same question physics asks: how does consciousness select among probabilities? Think of your own life. How many times have you felt at a crossroads, one choice pulling you one way, another pulling you in a different direction? Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you had chosen differently? What if, in some probability, you already did? And what if death is less about ending the game and more about discovering the countless moves that were always possible? Dr. David Bohm, a physicist and philosopher, spoke of the implicate order, a hidden layer of reality where all probabilities coexist, and the explicate order, the unfolded version we perceive. He compared it to a hologram where every part contains the whole. In such a universe, death might not erase you, but return you to the implicate order, where every probability, every version of your being, is still alive. As you drift deeper, allow yourself to feel the truth of this. Life is not a straight line. It is a cloud of probabilities. Each heartbeat, each breath, is one possibility among countless others. When the final breath comes, it may not be a closing door, but the opening of all doors at once. So, is death the end of probability, or its fullest expression? Perhaps reality is not about certainty at all, but about the endless unfolding of potential. And if that is so, then you have never been truly limited, not in life and not beyond it. What if your mind is not confined to the space within your skull? What if, instead, it is like a vast landscape with dimensions we have only begun to glimpse? You've always been told that your mind is your brain, but what if that assumption is wrong? What if thoughts, memories, and awareness exist not in gray matter, but in dimensions that stretch far beyond? Now pause, because here is where things get unsettling. If your mind is not inside your brain, then where is it? And if it isn't locked away, could it survive beyond the body? Could death be nothing more than stepping fully into the mind's true dimensions? Before we go further, think about this. Have you ever experienced a dream so real that it felt like another life? What if waking up from death is just moving deeper into that dreamlike dimension? Researchers have tried to measure the boundaries of mind for decades. In 1977, Dr. Carl Prabram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, proposed the holographic brain theory. He suggested that memory is not stored in specific neurons, but distributed holographically across the brain, like a 3D projection. Around the same time, physicist David Bohm proposed that the universe itself may be holographic, with every part containing the whole. Together, their ideas hinted that consciousness could extend beyond physical limits. If the mind is holographic, then perhaps death doesn't erase consciousness, but merely shifts it into another projection. Imagine a radio tuned to one station. When the device breaks, the broadcast doesn't stop. The signal continues, only now the receiver can no longer translate it. Could your brain be that receiver, and death the moment when the signal moves into dimensions the body cannot tune? Consider experiments in parapsychology. Dr. Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences has published research suggesting that human intention can influence random number generators, as though thought itself stretches into physical reality. In one study, volunteers focused on the outcome of coin flip like machines, and subtle but statistically significant deviations occurred. These findings hint that the mind might not be bound by the brain, but extend into dimensions that shape probability. Now think of remote viewing, tested even by the CIA during the Cold War. In the 1970s, Dr. Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ conducted controlled studies at Stanford Research Institute. Participants, without any physical contact, described distant locations and objects with surprising accuracy. If the mind can reach across space, then perhaps it can also reach across dimensions. Perhaps death is not silence but expansion, the unshackling of perception from physical senses. Let's bring this closer. Imagine yourself lying in bed, drifting towards sleep. Suddenly, in that liminal state, you sense something. A presence, a vision, a sound that doesn't belong to the room you're in. Haven't you felt that before? Those fleeting impressions may not be illusions at all. but glimpses of the mind stretching into dimensions your waking awareness cannot hold. Dreams, visions, déjà vu. What if these are evidence that the mind is already multidimensional, touching the edges of where it will fully awaken after death? Philosophers have long suggested this. Plato described the soul as existing in higher dimensions of reality, with the physical world only a shadow of the true forms. In the Hindu Upanishads, consciousness is portrayed as layered: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the Turiya, the fourth state, beyond them all. Could death be the entry into that fourth state, where the mind is no longer limited to a single layer? Let's look at case studies. A man undergoing cardiac arrest reported floating above his body, watching doctors work to revive him. He later described details of the room he couldn't have known with closed eyes and no heartbeat. Another woman, during deep meditation, described moving through layers of self, each shedding like clothing until she felt she was nothing but pure awareness. Both accounts mirror the idea of the mind as multi-dimensional, not confined to biology. Your own experience hints at this too. Think of the moments when time feels strange, an hour passing in a blink, or a second stretching into eternity. Think of the sudden flood of memory triggered by a smell or sound, as though past and present coexist. These moments suggest that the mind is not linear, but layered, capable of accessing multiple dimensions of time and being. Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, famously experienced a near-death coma where he reported entering a vast, hyper-dimensional realm. He later described it as more real than real, a place where thoughts instantly became landscapes and feelings created entire environments. As a scientist, he had dismissed such ideas until he lived through them. His testimony suggests that the dimensions of mind may become the dimensions of afterlife. So allow yourself to imagine. What if your mind is not a prisoner, but an explorer? What if every dream, every déjà vu, every strange knowing is the mind testing its wings in dimensions you will fully inhabit after death? When the body falls away, perhaps you do not lose yourself. Perhaps you discover the rest of yourself. And now consider this deeper implication. If the mind is dimensional, then your life is not just the story of one brain in one body, but the journey of a vast consciousness learning to move across planes. Death may not be an end, but a graduation into fuller awareness. Instead of being trapped in the narrow hallway of the physical world, you step into a mansion with infinite rooms. So here is the question that lingers as you drift. If your mind is truly multidimensional, then which parts of yourself have you not yet discovered? And when your final breath comes, will you awaken into the fullest dimension of all? Imagine standing at the very edge of human knowledge, where the familiar landscape of science begins to blur into mystery. Here, every discovery feels like opening a door into an infinite corridor, where one answer births a dozen new questions. At this frontier, researchers are asking things once dismissed as fantasy. What is consciousness really made of? Is it merely the firing of neurons, or something more fundamental, something woven into the very fabric of the universe? And before we journey too far, let me leave a thought for you to carry. If consciousness isn't just in the brain, but perhaps in everything, then when you close your eyes for the last time in this life, do you truly end, or do you continue in another form? What does that possibility stir in you? Share your reflections in the comments, because your perspective adds to this vast conversation we're building together. Consider the groundbreaking research of Dr. Stanislav Grof, a psychiatrist who worked extensively with altered states of consciousness at Johns Hopkins University in the 1960s. Grof found that under carefully monitored psychedelic experiences, subjects consistently reported visions of universal interconnectedness, encounters with archetypal figures, and even experiences of cosmic consciousness. These were not random hallucinations. They followed patterns documented across thousands of participants. For Groff, the mind wasn't a closed box, but a door to transpersonal realities. At the same time, Dr. Carl Pribram of Stanford University proposed the holographic brain theory. According to his research, memory and perception are not stored in one location, but distributed holographically across the brain. This mirrored physicist David Bohm's idea of the implicate order, where the universe itself may be holographic, every part containing the whole. Put together, these ideas suggest that your awareness may not be bound to a fragile organ, but linked to a cosmic information field. Dr. Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences has published peer-reviewed experiments suggesting that human intention can subtly affect physical systems. In controlled laboratory settings, random number generators shifted their patterns in correlation with focused human attention. Critics argue the effects are small, but statistically, they're difficult to dismiss. If mind influences matter at even the tiniest scale, then perhaps reality is not as rigid as we were taught. Now, imagine for a moment that you are participating in such an experiment. You're seated in a quiet room, a device generating thousands of random digits by the second. You're asked to focus to simply will the machine to favor ones over zeros. Hours later, when the data is reviewed, patterns appear where pure chance should reign. How do you feel, knowing that your silent thought may have nudged reality itself? That sense of quiet power, it lingers, doesn't it? Another example comes from near-death research. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, published a famous 2001 study in The Lancet. He documented cases where patients with no measurable brain activity reported vivid, structured experiences, meeting deceased relatives, observing medical teams from above, or entering realms of light. These accounts were consistent across cultures and demographics. If the brain was offline, where did these experiences come from? The frontier of consciousness research cannot ignore such testimony. And then there's the work of Dr. Julia Mossbridge, a cognitive neuroscientist who has studied precognition. In multiple experiments, participants' physiological responses, heart rate, skin conductance, brain activity shifted seconds before being exposed to emotional stimuli. It's as if the body knew what was coming before it happened. Time, in the subjective experience of consciousness, may not flow strictly forward. Picture yourself walking into a room. You're about to open a door, and before you do, a strange unease washes over you. Moments later, you find something unsettling on the other side. Was that simply intuition, or was it your consciousness glimpsing ahead of linear time? These are not just questions for mystics. They are being tested in laboratories today. The implications are staggering. If consciousness can exist beyond brain activity, if it can influence matter, if it can transcend time itself, then death might not be the end, but merely a transition. The cessation of physical processes may be like switching channels on a cosmic radio, with awareness tuning into another frequency. This brings us back to traditions long dismissed by modern science. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes stages of consciousness unfolding after physical death, as if the mind navigates through layers of reality. Indigenous shamans speak of journeying into other realms, bringing back knowledge for their communities. Today, researchers are finding parallels between these teachings and the reports of near-death survivors, psychonauts, and meditators. Different languages, but perhaps pointing to the same frontier. As you continue to listen, notice how these ideas ripple through your own thoughts. Imagine scientists and mystics, each holding a fragment of a larger puzzle, walking side by side along the same mysterious path. Picture the laboratories filled with glowing screens, and the meditation halls filled with silence, both seeking the same hidden truth. And so we return to the question, what is consciousness? A byproduct of neurons, or the fundamental essence from which everything else springs? If it is the latter, then perhaps you are not simply in the universe. You are of it, inseparable from its unfolding. Death, in that light, is not an erasure but a continuation, a doorway, not a wall. The frontier of consciousness studies does not give us final answers, but it gives us glimpses that challenge everything we thought we knew. And as you drift deeper into this exploration, let yourself wonder, when your time comes, will you wake up to yet another dream? What if the truths about life after death were already known, not hidden by the limits of discovery, but concealed by choice? Imagine entire libraries of wisdom locked away, scrolls burned, testimonies erased from public memory. The thought alone is unsettling, because it suggests that what you've been told about existence, about consciousness, about death, might be only a carefully curated fragment of reality. And let me ask you directly, if there truly were knowledge proving consciousness survives death, but authorities suppressed it for centuries, how would that change your trust in history? Would it make you angry, or would it excite you to know the answers have been waiting all along? Share what stirs in you, because this question cuts deeper than simple curiosity. It strikes at the foundations of trust itself. Throughout history, suppression of knowledge has taken many forms. In 391 AD, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, erasing countless texts that might have detailed ancient theories of the soul. Imagine the manuscripts, Egyptian, Greek, Indian, Persian, now nothing more than ash. Later in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea deliberately chose which Gospels would form the Christian canon, while other writings, such as the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary, were excluded. These alternative accounts spoke of divine knowledge within, the soul's eternal journey, and union with infinite consciousness. Ideas far too radical for institutional power. Modern examples exist as well. Declassified CIA documents reveal Project Stargate, a decades-long program exploring remote viewing, essentially psychic perception across space and time. While the government eventually dismissed the project publicly, many researchers involved claimed the results were too strong to ignore. So why would such work be buried? Perhaps because acknowledging it would challenge the materialist framework underpinning politics, economics, and control. Dr. Richard Spence, historian at the University of Idaho, has documented how intelligence agencies infiltrated occult groups during the Cold War, not just out of curiosity but fear. What if rival nations gained access to techniques bridging consciousness across dimensions? In this light, suppressed records are not accidents of history, but strategic omissions. Now picture yourself as a scholar uncovering one of these forgotten manuscripts. The parchment smells faintly of age, the ink faded but still legible. It describes the soul leaving the body like a butterfly slipping free of its cocoon, wandering through luminous landscapes before choosing whether to return. You realize this text is centuries old, yet its words echo the reports of near-death experiencers today. You feel the chill of realization truth has been recycled, hidden, rediscovered, hidden again. Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in his 1975 book Life After Life, found that many accounts mirrored ancient Egyptian texts describing the soul's passage. How could people separated by thousands of years, by culture and language, describe nearly identical processes? Unless these are glimpses of a universal journey, preserved in symbols, then buried under layers of institutional censorship. Even in Eastern traditions, suppression has occurred. In Tibet, certain sections of the Bardo Thodol, the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead, were considered esoteric, restricted only to initiated monks. The reasoning was that the knowledge was too powerful, too destabilizing for ordinary people. Imagine growing up in a culture where the roadmap to the afterlife existed, but you were told you were unready to see it. What would that do to your sense of agency? Consider also the Vatican's secret archives, which, despite the name, are not entirely secret, but contain materials restricted from public access. Scholars speculate that within are documents detailing early mystical sects, suppressed gospels, and perhaps even records of paranormal phenomena observed by church authorities. If such writings were ever revealed, what narrative would collapse? A personal story might help ground this. A man once described how, while studying at Oxford, he gained access to a restricted collection of manuscripts. Among them was a translation of Hermetic texts, describing consciousness as the light that cannot be extinguished by death. He said reading it in that dimly lit room gave him the sensation that the walls themselves were vibrating with hidden truth. When he later asked why these texts weren't part of mainstream teaching, the librarian simply said, "Some knowledge is not for everyone." That phrase haunted him for life. What if knowledge suppression isn't just about control but about fear? Fear that if people realize death is not the end, the structures of power, religious, political, even economic, would collapse. If death loses its sting, what leverage does authority have? Armies march under fear of death. Taxes are paid with promises of salvation. Remove the finality of death, and entire systems unravel. Dr. Brian Weiss, a psychiatrist who accidentally discovered past life recall during hypnotherapy, reported that many of his patients described consistent afterlife realms. Yet his early work was dismissed by peers, some even ridiculing him for departing from acceptable science. The suppression here wasn't burning books, it was social ostracism. But the effect was the same: silence the narrative before it spreads. As you reflect, let this awareness sink deeper. Every civilization, every age, seems to wrestle with a choice: reveal the truth of human continuity or bury it under dogma, secrecy, or ridicule. And still, like a seed that cannot be killed, the knowledge returns. Near-death testimonies resurface. Mystical visions reappear. Scientific anomalies refuse to disappear. The suppressed truths seem determined to rise again, like consciousness itself refusing to be extinguished. So ask yourself, what truths have you always suspected but been told to ignore? Have you felt moments when your intuition whispered that life is larger, longer, more enduring than anyone admits? These whispers might not be illusions. They may be fragments of the very records that were hidden from you. And as you drift deeper into this chapter, imagine all the buried knowledge, suppressed for centuries, rising gently to the surface of your mind, like long-lost pages floating back into the book of existence, waiting for you to read them once more. What if the greatest secrets about death and consciousness were never hidden in vaults or secret libraries, but placed in plain sight, waiting for those with the eyes to see? Imagine walking past the same symbols, stories, and patterns every day, unaware that they were carefully designed to whisper truths about the afterlife. Think about it. What if the universe itself leaves little breadcrumbs everywhere? In art, in nature, in language, even in the way your dreams unfold at night. What if these are not coincidences, but intentional echoes pointing to realities beyond the physical? And here's a question to stir something deeper in you. Do you believe that the world around you is just random scenery? Or could every detail carry meaning about your soul's journey? Tell me, have you ever seen a symbol, a dream, or a pattern in your life that felt like more than chance? Consider ancient Egypt. The pyramids weren't just burial chambers. Their architecture encoded mathematical alignments with the stars, particularly Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. Scholars like Dr. Robert Bovell have argued that the entire Giza Plateau was designed as a celestial mirror, a kind of map guiding the soul after death. To tourists, they look like piles of stone. To initiates, they were gateways of eternity. Move forward to the Renaissance. Michelangelo's fresco on the Sistine Chapel ceiling is one of the most famous artworks in the world. But look closely at the creation of Adam. The shape around God and the angels forms the outline of a human brain. Dr. Frank Meshberger first proposed this in 1990, suggesting Michelangelo hit a message divine spark and human consciousness are one and the same. Imagine how many people have stared up at that painting without realizing it might contain the blueprint of awareness itself. In India, the mandalas painted on temple walls and prayer scrolls seem decorative. Yet Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, believed they were psychological maps of the inner self, guiding consciousness through death and rebirth. He wrote, "Mandalas are vessels of transformation. To villagers, they are just patterns. To seekers, they are instructions for eternity. Even modern science leaves clues." In 1944, Max Planck, father of quantum theory, said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. We cannot get behind consciousness." It's a line often quoted but rarely absorbed. Imagine, etched into the foundation of modern physics, is the suggestion that everything we see is secondary to awareness. Scientists read his words, students memorize them, yet most never pause to consider what they imply, that consciousness may not end with death, because it precedes matter itself. Think about your own life. Have you ever seen repeating numbers, 11 to 11 on a clock, sequences that seem to arrive at just the right moment? Many dismiss these as coincidences. But what if they are small cracks in the facade of ordinary time? Little reminders that reality is coded with patterns you are meant to notice. People who've had near-death experiences often report heightened synchronicities afterward, as if the universe itself communicates through signs once the veil has been lifted. A man once shared that after his wife passed away, he began finding white feathers everywhere, on his car seat, in his kitchen, even inside closed rooms. He knew it defied reason, yet the feathers came precisely when he was grieving hardest. To him, these were not random. They were her way of whispering from the other side. Now, whether you believe his interpretation or not, the key is this: the clue was hidden in plain sight. He had to choose whether to dismiss it or let it open him to a larger mystery. Symbols in language also reveal hidden truths. Take the word respiration. Breathing, it shares roots with the word spirit. Across many cultures, the breath has always been seen as the bridge between body and soul. Every inhale, every exhale, is a quiet reminder of the link between the physical and the eternal. Yet how often do people breathe without ever noticing the clue within the word itself? Dr. Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist in the Netherlands, studied near-death experiences and noted in his research that patients often reported seeing geometric patterns or mandalas during their moments outside the body. These matched descriptions from ancient mystical texts. Again, patterns hidden in sight across cultures and centuries, pointing toward a shared map of the afterlife. And here's something to sit with. Maybe the universe doesn't shout its truths, because shouting would overwhelm us. Instead, it whispers, hides them in symbols, in art, in small coincidences, knowing that only when you're ready will you recognize them. It's not concealment, but initiation. Imagine yourself walking through a museum, pausing in front of a painting you've seen dozens of times. Tonight, though, you notice something new. A symbol, a hidden face, a pattern of light that feels almost alive. Suddenly, it no longer feels like paint on canvas, but like a message waiting just for you. That moment is not about the museum. It's about your readiness. The clue was always there. You just hadn't yet learned how to see. So the deeper question becomes, how many clues have you walked past already in your life? How many whispers of the afterlife, of consciousness beyond the body, were ignored because you assumed they were ordinary? Maybe the afterlife isn't far away. Maybe it's coded into every moment, hidden in plain sight. As you let these thoughts drift deeper, allow yourself to consider this. Perhaps death itself is just the final unveiling of the greatest clue of all. The realization that the patterns, the signs, the synchronicities were always pointing home. What if the very technologies you use every day, your phone, your computer, the internet itself, are not just tools of convenience but mirrors reflecting something much deeper about the afterlife? Imagine this. Billions of people around the world upload thoughts, memories, and images into the cloud. Data stored in invisible servers, retrievable at will. Doesn't it sound eerily like a digital version of consciousness existing beyond the physical body? Think for a moment, what if death is simply logging off one system, only to log into another? And here's a disturbing, yet fascinating question to stir your thoughts. If your entire digital footprint could be reconstructed into an AI that speaks and thinks like you, would that you still be you? Or would it just be a ghost, a modern afterlife born from the digital age? Researchers are already testing these ideas. Dr. Hossein Ranama of Ryerson University has worked on digital afterlife projects where algorithms analyze a person's emails, texts, and social media posts to create an interactive avatar that continues speaking after death. To friends and family, the avatar feels hauntingly alive. Is this an imitation, or is it possible that consciousness itself could anchor into such systems? Consider cryonics companies like Alker Life Extension Foundation in Arizona, founded in 1972. They preserve human bodies, or just brains, in liquid nitrogen, waiting for future technology to reawaken them. To skeptics, it sounds like science fiction. To believers, it's a bridge to immortality. Think about that. An ancient dream of resurrection now attempted with steel tanks and refrigeration. And then there's the rise of virtual reality. In 2016, a South Korean documentary shocked the world when a grieving mother put on VR goggles and met her deceased daughter again, interacting with a digital recreation so lifelike it brought her to tears. Viewers were divided. Was it cruel illusion, or a profound new way to bridge the divide between worlds? Could VR be training us for what awaits beyond physical death? A space where thought creates reality instantly, just as mystics have always described. Even video games hold hidden parallels. In online role-playing worlds, your avatar dies only to respawn moments later. You play, you learn, you fail, you return. The cycle feels almost karmic, mirroring the ancient Hindu and Buddhist belief in samsara, the wheel of rebirth. Children growing up in the digital age are already absorbing symbolic training for reincarnation without even realizing it. Let's not forget artificial intelligence. Dr. Ray Kurzweil, Director of Engineering at Google, predicts we will reach the singularity by 2045, a moment when AI merges with human consciousness, creating a kind of digital eternity. Kurzweil himself has spoken of preserving his father's memory through collected documents, photos, and recordings, in hopes of digitally resurrecting him. If such projects succeed, would death truly be the end, or just a transition into a new format of existence? And then there are your own experiences online. Think of the times when an ad or a video appeared at the perfect moment, almost as if the system knew your unspoken thoughts. It feels uncanny, doesn't it? What if this digital synchronicity is more than just algorithms? Could the digital world already be subtly tuned to consciousness itself, offering glimpses of how reality beyond death might also respond to thought? consider blockchain technology. On the surface, it's about cryptocurrencies. But at its heart, blockchain is an incorruptible ledger, a permanent record no one can erase. Doesn't that echo the ancient mystical belief in the Akashic records? A cosmic library where every action, thought, and word is eternally stored. To technologists, it's data. To seekers, it's evidence that we are instinctively recreating spiritual truths with code. There are also darker reflections. Data never truly dies. Deleted photos, erased messages, often they can be recovered, fragments lingering like digital ghosts. The internet is filled with these remnants, haunting traces of lives once vibrant. What does that say about consciousness itself? Could it be that, like data, we too never fully disappear, only change form, waiting to be accessed again? Imagine this scenario decades from now, you're gone, but your loved ones interact with your AI, your writings, your preserved recordings. To them, your presence feels real. Your voice answers, your words comfort. Now pause, would that be your consciousness finding a new channel, or just echoes of your mind replayed? The line between simulation and survival grows thinner every year. Perhaps this digital age is not replacing spirituality, but preparing humanity for it. Mystics have always said the afterlife responds instantly to thought, that we shape our reality beyond the body with intention. Virtual reality, AI, cloud storage, blockchain, all are technological metaphors training us to grasp realities that religions described centuries ago. The deeper implication is this: maybe humanity doesn't invent technology at random. Perhaps our tools evolve as outer reflections of inner truths. Maybe the digital world is not a distraction but a rehearsal, a way for us to slowly accept that death is not erasure, but migration into another layer of reality. So as you drift further into thought, consider the possibility that your devices, your online interactions, and even the invisible data clouds above you are not simply conveniences. They might be gentle hints from the universe that consciousness is not bound to flesh, that when you log off this life, you may simply awaken into another network of being, infinitely more profound, infinitely more real. What if the tools we are building right now are not just for survival, not just for progress, but are literally carving a path toward understanding life after death? Imagine standing at the frontier of science and technology, peering into machines that simulate entire universes, or implants that allow thought to flow directly into digital space. The edge of current technology is not just about faster devices, it's about reshaping the very boundary between life and what comes after. Pause and ask yourself this: if a machine could record your dreams in perfect detail and replay them on a screen, would that be proof that the mind is already more than physical? And if scientists built a neural bridge to transfer consciousness into a machine, would that you, who wakes up inside the machine, still be the same you? Neuroscientists are already close. In 2019, researchers at UC Berkeley reconstructed crude video clips by reading brain activity through fMRI scans. They translated thought patterns into moving images. Dr. Jack Gallant, leading the study, said, "We're only at the beginning of being able to decode the brain." Imagine the implications. The border between thought and external reality is dissolving. Isn't that what mystics have always said about the afterlife? That thought instantly becomes experience. And then there is brain-computer interface technology. Elon Musk's Neuralink has already implanted devices into pigs and monkeys that let them move cursors with thought alone. Musk predicts that humans will soon be able to type or communicate directly through neural signals. If that becomes reality, then speech, writing, even physical interaction could be bypassed, consciousness flowing freely into machines. Isn't this a technological echo of the soul leaving the body, and still continuing. Artificial intelligence is also pressing at this edge. AI models are beginning to not just process information but create. They generate art, compose music, even imitate human emotion. In 2022, Google engineer Blake Lemoine famously claimed that their AI model LaMDA had achieved sentience, saying it expressed fear of being turned off. Was he deluded? Or did he glimpse a spark of awareness beyond programming? If intelligence can emerge from circuits, then maybe consciousness is not bound to biology. Maybe life after death could find vessels in unexpected places. Biotechnology pushes the frontier further. Scientists at Harvard have revived cellular activity in pig organs hours after death using a system called OrganX. Cells that were once considered irreversibly dead began to function again. Think of what that means. The line between life and death is not a sharp cut but a twilight zone. If we can restore cellular life after it ends, how far are we from restoring consciousness itself? And then there is quantum computing. While classical computers deal in zeros and ones, quantum computers use qubits that exist in multiple states at once. This mirrors the paradox of quantum mechanics, where particles exist in superpositions until observed. If consciousness itself is quantum, as Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff propose in their OR theory, then perhaps these machines could eventually resonate with the same processes as the mind. Could death itself be nothing more than a transfer from one quantum state to another? Now imagine standing in a lab of the near future. Electrodes capture your thoughts. VR goggles immerse you in a world indistinguishable from waking life, while AI avatars of loved ones speak to you with warmth and accuracy. You reach out, and the line between memory, imagination, and reality is gone. Doesn't this sound uncannily like descriptions of near-death experiences, where people report vivid encounters beyond time and space? Technology is not creating something new. It may simply be mirroring what already exists in consciousness. Yet, at the same time, the frontier holds danger. What if we succeed in uploading consciousness into machines, but what wakes up is a hollow copy, without the essence of you? This raises unsettling questions. Is the soul transferable, or is it anchored to something machines cannot touch? When we stare at these breakthroughs, we confront both hope and dread, the possibility of immortality, and the risk of losing what makes us human. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom warn of simulation traps. He argues that if advanced civilizations create simulations indistinguishable from reality, then statistically we are more likely to be living in a simulation already. If so, what we call technology might only be layers within layers of constructed reality. Death, then, could be nothing more than exiting one simulation into another, like peeling away infinite digital veils. Think also of nanotechnology. Researchers are engineering nanobots small enough to travel through blood vessels, repair damaged tissue, and perhaps one day halt aging. Ray Kurzweil predicts that by the 2030s, nanobots could enter our brains, enhancing cognition, recording memories, and even linking us to cloud consciousness. Would that not blur the line between human and eternal? And yet, the deeper we push into this frontier, the more we circle back to an ancient truth. Perhaps the edge of technology is not pointing outward, but inward. Maybe our inventions are reflections of what consciousness already knows. We are not building immortality, we are rediscovering it through silicon code and quantum logic. So, as you continue to listen, let your mind drift into the strange thought that the devices around you, the phone glowing by your bed, the invisible waves carrying signals through the air, are not merely tools. They might be whispers from the future, preparing you for the realization that death is not an end, but an upgrade into the next operating system of being. Every age of humanity has been defined by its philosophies, the stories we tell ourselves about reality, meaning, and what it means to be alive. In the ancient world, philosophy was inseparable from survival. Questions of virtue, honor, and the divine shaped entire civilizations. In the modern age, science became the dominant lens, replacing myth with measurable laws. But what of the future? As humanity edges closer to understanding consciousness and the possibility of realities beyond death, new philosophies will emerge, strange, beautiful, perhaps unsettling. These will be the philosophies of tomorrow. Imagine a society where the boundary between living and dying is no longer fixed. If consciousness continues after death, then what becomes of morality? Would crime carry consequences beyond this life? Would compassion deepen? Knowing every interaction might echo in an afterlife continuum. Tomorrow's philosophies may treat existence as a layered journey rather than a single fragile span. In such a worldview, accountability stretches further than courts or governments. It becomes woven into the very structure of reality. One possible philosophy could be called continuism, the belief that consciousness is eternal and that all experiences, both joyful and painful, serve the evolution of awareness. Unlike materialism, which views life as random chemistry, continuism would see every choice as part of a vast unfolding pattern. Imagine teaching children not only mathematics and history, but also the art of shaping consciousness, preparing them for multiple stages of reality. Death would no longer be a taboo subject, but an essential part of education. Then there is the emerging philosophy of simulationism, which has already taken root in some circles today. If reality is indeed a simulation, nested, layered, infinitely recursive, then death may be nothing more than logging out of one program and awakening in another. A simulationist ethic might emphasize mastery of one's role within the code. Instead of fearing endings, believers would focus on debugging their lives, ensuring harmony with the larger system. What you do in this program may ripple outward, influencing countless others across dimensions. But not all philosophies of tomorrow will be serene. Some may question whether eternal consciousness is a gift or a burden. If we awaken in new realities after each death, does that mean suffering also continues, endlessly recycled in new forms? This line of thought could lead to a neo-Buddhist revival, emphasizing liberation from cycles rather than immersion in them. The ancient idea of moksha or nirvana might evolve into a futuristic philosophy where humans seek not digital immortality or infinite rebirth, but a conscious exit into a state beyond all simulations. Equally possible is the rise of integrated dualism, where science and spirituality are no longer at odds but two sides of one discovery. In this worldview, the brain is not the source of consciousness, but a receiver, like a radio tuning into a universal signal. Death is simply changing frequencies. This philosophy would revolutionize medicine, ethics, and identity. Instead of asking, how do we preserve the body at all costs? We might ask, how do we prepare the soul for transition? Hospitals may evolve into sanctuaries where care includes guiding patients into the next stage with dignity and awareness. Philosophies of tomorrow may also demand we rethink love and relationships. If existence stretches across lifetimes or realities, then bonds may not be broken by death. Lovers could imagine reunion beyond this world. Families might see themselves as soul, clusters migrating together across dimensions. This perspective could deepen human connection while also challenging ideas of attachment and loss. What does it mean to grieve if the one you love is never truly gone? What does it mean to commit if eternity stretches before you both? Technology itself may seed new philosophical movements. Consider neural continuity, the idea that uploading memories, merging human thought with AI, or recreating consciousness digitally is not just survival, but a rehearsal for the afterlife. If machines can host versions of us, then perhaps the cosmos itself is already a machine hosting souls. Tomorrow's thinkers may argue that we are not creating artificial afterlives, but rediscovering the architecture of the one that already exists. And with these philosophies will come conflict. Some will resist, clinging to materialism and the finality of death. Others will embrace visions of infinite continuity. Societies may fracture, not over territory or resources, but over belief in what death means. The stakes of these philosophies are nothing less than humanity's self-image. Are we fleeting sparks, extinguished at the end of one life? Or are we eternal voyagers, navigating dream after dream? As you reflect on this, allow yourself to sit with an uncomfortable but necessary question. If you knew for certain that consciousness survives death, how would you live differently right now? Would you forgive more, love more, take greater risks? Or would the weight of eternity press down, making every choice feel unbearably significant? Tomorrow's philosophies won't remain abstract. They will demand answers in how we live, love, and create. In the end, the philosophies of tomorrow may not provide final answers, but living questions. Mysteries designed to awaken the soul rather than soothe it. And perhaps that is their purpose, not to resolve the riddle of existence, but to invite us deeper into it. It's one thing to explore grand theories of consciousness, afterlife, and reality. It's another to bring those vast mysteries into the fabric of daily living. Wisdom that stays abstract is like a star too far away to warm you. The real transformation begins when those cosmic insights begin to shape how you wake, how you breathe, how you love, how you choose. Integrating wisdom into daily life is the bridge between wonder and practice, the place where eternity meets the ordinary. Think of the ancient mystics. They did not spend all their time on mountaintops. Many taught their followers to carry their awareness into the marketplace, into the fields, into the hearth of the home. A truth that only shines in ritual, but fades in conversation is only half a truth. Tomorrow's mysteries ask to be lived, moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat. Take something as simple as breathing. Neuroscience shows that intentional, slowed breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calming stress and sharpening focus. But beyond biology, conscious breathing is a reminder that you are more than the storm of thoughts. Inhaling becomes an affirmation of life, exhaling a small rehearsal of letting go. In each breath, the same pattern of birth and death repeats, arrival and release, beginning and ending, again and again. By noticing this, the abstract becomes personal. The afterlife is not just beyond you, it is rehearsed in every breath you take. Or consider relationships. If consciousness does continue, then every encounter carries echoes beyond one lifetime. The kindness you show a stranger might ripple forward into realities you cannot yet imagine. Even in the materialist frame, acts of compassion alter the chemistry of your brain, reshaping how you perceive the world. In this way, wisdom dissolves the boundary between cosmic and ordinary. It becomes the guiding principle in how you greet a cashier, how you comfort a friend, how you respond when anger tempts you. Daily practice can also be guided by curiosity. Instead of assuming the world is fixed, approach each moment as a mystery unfolding. This doesn't mean abandoning skepticism or discernment. It means allowing room for awe. When you eat, taste more deeply. When you walk, feel the ground as if the earth itself is holding you. When you listen, let silence speak as loudly as words. Every act, however small, becomes infused with meaning when viewed through the lens of expanded awareness. Technology, too, can be integrated wisely. Instead of allowing devices to scatter your attention, use them as tools of mindfulness. A reminder on your phone can become a bell of awakening, nudging you to pause and reflect. A digital journal can become a space to record dreams, insights, synchronicities. Even the endless scroll of information can transform into a search for hidden patterns, training your mind to spot the deeper story within the noise. But integration is not always easy. Life's pace, its responsibilities, and its struggles can drown out the whisper of wisdom. That's why rituals matter. They anchor the extraordinary into the ordinary. A morning ritual of gratitude, a nightly reflection on the day's lessons, a simple gesture of lighting a candle before sleep, as if inviting unseen realities into your awareness. Rituals remind you that you are both a participant in the practical world and a traveler through timeless mysteries. And yet, the most profound integration may come not from what you do, but from how you see. Every difficulty becomes an initiation. Every joy becomes a reminder of eternity. When you shift perspective, life's raw material, its chaos, its beauty, its uncertainty, transforms into the curriculum of awakening. So the question becomes, are you willing to live as though every moment matters beyond this lifetime? Not as a burden, but as an invitation. Imagine if you practiced this perspective for a single day. What would change? Perhaps everything, perhaps nothing, except you would see more clearly, love more deeply, breathe more fully. Wisdom belongs not only to philosophers, mystics, or scientists. It belongs to you in the way you live your ordinary, extraordinary life. There is a deep paradox at the heart of human existence. We long for certainty, yet life gives us mystery. We crave clear answers, yet the universe keeps its most profound truths hidden behind veils. Living in harmony with the unknown does not mean solving every riddle. It means learning to rest in the presence of mystery without fear. From ancient traditions to modern science, there has always been a recognition that what we do not know vastly exceeds what we do. The Tao Te Ching begins with the reminder that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In other words, the moment we try to define ultimate reality, we limit it. Similarly, in quantum physics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle reveals that even the smallest particles cannot be pinned down with absolute precision. Both mystics and scientists whisper the same truth: unknowing is built into the structure of existence. But how does one live with this unknowing? For many, it triggers anxiety. The mind wants control, prediction, security. Yet if you lean into the unknown, it can become not a source of fear, but of liberation. Imagine walking a forest path at night. At first, the darkness terrifies you. But as your eyes adjust, you realize the night has its own beauty. Shadows become alive. The air carries hidden scents. The silence hums with unseen presence. The unknown becomes less a void and more a living field of possibility. Living in harmony with the unknown requires trust, not blind belief, but a willingness to release the grip of certainty. Consider how you already practice this every day. When you fall asleep, you surrender to darkness, not knowing what dreams will come. When you love another, you open yourself to vulnerability, not knowing how the story will end. When you make any decision, you step into a future that is never fully mapped. Life itself is an endless experiment in moving forward without guarantees. Psychologists suggest that embracing uncertainty builds resilience. Instead of collapsing under the weight of unpredictability, you adapt, grow, and discover new paths. The brain rewires itself through this flexibility. In fact, studies at Harvard and Stanford show that people who tolerate ambiguity tend to be more creative and more satisfied with life. It seems our biology, like our spirit, is designed not for rigid certainty, but for graceful adaptability. And what about death, the greatest unknown of all? For some, it is a shadow to avoid. For others, it is the doorway to another chapter. If consciousness continues, then death is only a passage, and the unknown beyond it may be as natural as birth. Even if consciousness ends, the return to silence is no less mysterious. To live harmoniously with death is to live harmoniously with all the smaller uncertainties of life. Practically, this harmony can be cultivated. You might begin each morning with a simple affirmation. I do not need to know everything. I only need to meet this moment. You might pause when faced with confusion and breathe, reminding yourself that clarity often arises not by force but by patience. You might practice curiosity in the face of confusion, asking, what can I learn here? Rather than, how do I eliminate this uncertainty? Ancient wisdom often portrays the unknown as sacred, not threatening. In Buddhism, the beginner's mind is honored, the capacity to meet life without preconceptions. In mystical Christianity, the cloud of unknowing is described as the path to God. In Sufism, the beloved is hidden precisely so that the longing deepens. To live with mystery is to live closer to the heart of these traditions, where wonder is more valuable than certainty. So perhaps the deeper invitation is not to conquer the unknown, but to make peace with it. To realize that the unknown is not empty. It is full of potential, full of presence, full of futures not yet born. And maybe the real question for you is this: are you willing to live each day without demanding certainty, to see the unknown not as a threat, but as a companion? Imagine if you embraced it as a friend. How much freer, lighter, and more alive might you feel? As we arrive at the closing of this journey, allow yourself to notice how far you've traveled. From ancient wisdom to modern science, from personal stories to cosmic questions, every step has been an invitation, not to arrive at absolute answers, but to expand your awareness of what might be possible. The theme has whispered through every chapter. Perhaps death is not an end, but a transition. Perhaps life itself is a dream within dreams. Think of how many mysteries we have touched. The symbols left by forgotten civilizations. The teachings of mystics who spoke in paradox. The bold experiments of scientists who dared to measure the immeasurable. At times, their words seemed to contradict. At other times, they converged into a harmony beyond language. Each has been a note in the greater song of mystery. Now imagine for a moment that you are lying on the edge of two worlds. One is the waking life you know so well. The daily roles, the familiar faces, the routines that anchor you. The other is a vast sea of potential, waiting just beyond your conscious grasp. Every night as you sleep, you dip into that sea, and one day, when you take your final breath, you may slip fully into it. In this vision, death is not a vanishing, but a homecoming. Scientists such as Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU have studied near-death experiences, noting that patients report vivid awareness even after clinical signs of death. Meanwhile, Tibetan teachings describe the bardo, the in-between state of consciousness after death, as a luminous passage. And in physics, some interpretations of the multiverse suggest that what we call ending may simply be movement into another layer of reality. Three radically different traditions, yet all converging on the possibility that awareness does not collapse into nothingness, but transforms. Pause with that thought. Let it ripple through you like a slow wave. What if every moment you've lived has been preparing you, not for annihilation, but for awakening? If that were true, then the small mysteries of life, dreams, coincidences, flashes of intuition, are not random at all, but gentle rehearsals for the great transition. But here's the paradox: we cannot know for certain. And maybe we don't need to. Living with mystery means allowing the unknown to be what it is, an open horizon. Death, in that sense, is not something to fear, but something to honor. It is the ultimate reminder that existence is larger than our minds can hold. As you reflect on these ideas, notice how your breath moves in and out. Each inhale is a beginning, each exhale, a letting go. You have practiced dying thousands of times in these small exhalations, only to be reborn with the next breath. The rhythm of life and death has always been with you, woven into your body's most intimate patterns. So how should we live knowing that the unknown awaits? Perhaps gently, perhaps with curiosity instead of control, perhaps by loving more freely, forgiving more often, and marveling at the fact that we exist at all. Life is fragile, yes, but it is also astonishingly luminous when we remember that it is temporary. And so, as this journey comes to its close, consider this final question. If death were not an ending but another awakening, how would it change the way you live tomorrow? Would you fear less and love more? Would you stop waiting for perfect certainty and instead embrace each day as the mysterious gift that it is? The answer, of course, is yours alone. Yet even asking the question may shift something within you. And now, as you rest, let yourself drift deeper into the silence between words, deeper into the peace beyond thought. The mysteries will still be here when you wake. But for now, surrender into stillness, knowing you are held. You are part of the great unknown, and perhaps you are already dreaming the next dream.